Hello everyone, I'm Nizzahon, here with you on the Aether Hub for another top 10 list. Once again, Seiben and I are doing some interrelated videos. I'm looking at the best elf creatures in all of Magic's history in terms of how well they performed at Pro Tours and Grand Prix, and Seiben's going to look at elves on every single plane in a lore video. Over 300 elves have been printed in the history of Magic. They're a creature type that's been around from the very beginning of Magic, and they've been one of the more well-supported creature types. They've managed to find success at a lot of different formats. So we're going to see a lot of elves who've had multi-format success, and so we're going to look at which of these elves have done the most in all of these different formats of Magic the Gathering. Before we get started, let me show you guys how it is that I keep scores on my top 10 lists. Cards receive points on this list depending on how successful they've been on the competitive tournament scene, with Pro Tour top 8s worth twice as many points as Grand Prix top 8s. In addition to events obviously called Pro Tours and Grand Prix, I count events like Vintage Championships, Legacy Championships, and Worlds as Pro Tour top 8s because this allows me to more adequately display success that cards have had in Vintage and Legacy. Before you watch the rest of this video, let me know what you think the number 1 elf on this list will be and what your favorite elf card is in all of Magic. Now let's get started at number 10. At number 10, I have Birchlore Rangers, the first of several elves on this list capable of producing mana, which probably comes as no surprise. The Rangers never saw any play in the block or the standard of its time. Elves just weren't good enough to compete with Goblin or Affinity back then, but they showed up in Extended in a big way, in a combo deck of sorts that used Glimpse of Nature and a bunch of mana elves and Glimpse of Nature to draw the entire library and play a win condition like Grape Shot or Predator Dragon. Birchlore Rangers was important for this deck because for every 2 elves you got into play, you could produce 1 mana to play another elf and continue to draw cards. Once people figured out this deck, it was so good that Glimpse of Nature had to be banned out of Extended. While it was legal, this elf put up 6 Pro Tour top 8s at Pro Tour Berlin in 2008 and 2 Grand Prix top 8s at Grand Prix Hanover in 2009. The Rangers are also a key card in Legacy Elves, where Glimpse of Nature is still legal. These decks don't try to use a card with Storm or Predator Dragon to go for the win though. They use Izuri, Renegade Leader, to end the game instead, which pumps their whole team. Elves put up a top 8 at a Legacy Pro Tour as recently as November of 2016, so it is entirely possible for the Rangers to see some more play. At number 9, we have Heritage Druid, a card very similar to Birchlore Rangers, and actually a big part of why the Rangers eventually saw play in Extended, since it provided the deck with another elf who could produce mana, but at an even better rate. 3 green mana for every 3 elves you have, which assisted you in drawing all the cards in your library with Glimpse of Nature. It saw play in the same decks that Birchlore Rangers saw play in Extended and Legacy, but it also made it into more elf deck lists in Legacy because it is the more efficient at helping you combo out. And it also has a couple of Grand Prix top 8s in Modern that it picked up in 2015, since it is legal there, where Birchlore Rangers are not. Heritage Druid has helped an elf deck finish in the top 8 in Modern as recently as November of 2016, and it has also picked up a number of Grand Prix top 16s in Modern, so it looks like Elves and Heritage Druid may have a few more top 8s in them. At number 8, we have Viridian Shaman, a 3-mana 2/2 who blows up an artifact when she comes into play. Viridian Shaman was an important card in the days of Mirrodin, which resulted in most formats having an artifact-based deck in them. It first showed up in Mirrodin Block Constructed, where it was so good that it appeared as a 4 of in the main board of a ramp deck called 12 Posts that finished in the top 8 of Pro Tour Kobe. In Standard, it did most of its work at Worlds in 2004 and in 2007, both of which were Standard. In 2004, it also found its way into main boards as a full play set because artifacts were so ubiquitous, but by 2007 it had become more of a sideboard card in Standard. In Extended, it first showed up as a sideboard card in Dredgetog control decks, but it later showed up in 7 of the top 8 decks of Pro Tour Berlin in 2008, which was largely made up of the same elf deck that Heritage Druid was in that resulted in the banning of Glimpse of Nature. It hasn't seen play in a high-level event in almost 3 years, though, and seems unlikely to continue to put up numbers. Though if elves become good in Modern again and Affinity is still around, it is a possibility. However, there's a reason that Viridian Shaman stopped seeing play, and that is because a card that fills the same niche but does a better job of it got printed, and that's our number 7 card, Reclamation Sage. Similar to the Shaman, the Sage is a 3-mana 2-power creature who blows up artifacts, but the Sage can also hit enchantments. It comes with 1 less toughness, but that is definitely worth the trade-off. Reclamation Sage saw a lot of play in Standard because of its versatility. It also existed in Theros Standard, where more enchantments than normal were being played, making it even better than it would have been otherwise. Sort of similar to how Viridian Shaman existed in an artifact-heavy Standard. It appeared in a lot of decks that just happened to have green in them that wanted to make sure they had a way to deal with enchantments and artifacts, including Sultai Whip, Abzan Midrange, and Green-Black Constellation. It also made some appearances in Devotion decks. The Sage was good enough for Modern too, though, especially in decks that could run only 1 copy of the Sage, but search it up with tutor effects when a problem enchantment or artifact showed up. At first, this meant birthing pod decks, where it was obviously quite good in the mirror, but it has also included decks running Collected Company and Court of Calling. It has also been good enough to see play in Modern, where it has appeared primarily in Elf tribal decks. It hasn't picked up a top 8 since November of 2016, but it did finish in the top 16 of 2 different decks in Modern Grand Prix in February of 2017, so it is likely the Sage will continue to build her resume. At number 6, we have a card that seems seemingly underpowered for a card to be on this list, and that is Elvish Visionary. Just a 2-mana 1/1 that draws you a card. You wouldn't think that would be good enough for a number 6 on a list of elves, right? Wrong. He might be simple, but he's pretty powerful in the right decks. Despite the fact that the Visionary has been in Standard multiple times, it was originally printed in Shards of Alara, but was printed in Magic 2010 and 2013, and in Magic Origins. But despite all those printings, it only really saw play in its most recent run through Standard, and was one of the creatures that Rally the Ancestors decks played, since it had a good enter the battlefield ability and was easy to cast. It was an ideal creature to sacrifice an Nantuko Husk, or another creature, and then get back with the Rally so you could draw another card and sacrifice it again for more value. It also saw play in similar decks built around Cryptolith Rites that also ran the Husk as a way to win the game. While Rally the Ancestors wasn't in Standard long with Magic Origins, it put up some crazy numbers before it rotated out of Standard, and many considered it the best deck in Standard during the time. It also saw play in the extended decks that ran Glimpse of Nature to help it combo off, where it was pretty nice because it helped you draw an additional card, in addition to the one that Glimpse of Nature already allowed you to draw. It has also picked up 2 Grand Prix top 8s in Modern and Legacy Elf decks. Like many of the elves on this list, it picked up a Modern Grand Prix top 8 as recently as November 2016, so it isn't any stretch to say that it has a good shot at improving its numbers as time goes on. At number 5, we have our only Planeswalker on this list, as you might expect, Nyssa Vastwood Seer. Part of the cycle of double-faced Planeswalkers from Magic Origins, Nyssa was pretty dominant in her time in Standard, and in fact makes this list purely on the strength of those appearances, as she has never seen play anywhere else. For 3 mana, she searches your library for a forest and provides a 2/2 body. Already some pretty decent value that makes her solid in the early part of the game. As the game goes on, though, she eventually flips into Nyssa Sage Animist, who can provide your deck with card advantage and can always make sure that you have a 4/4 elemental token in play to protect her and your life or try to win the game for you. Nyssa was one of the most played cards in Standard for a while, and any deck touching green wanted to play her. At the beginning of her time in Standard, this meant Abzan decks, but it later also meant Megamorph decks, Collected Company decks, green-white tokens, and Delirium decks. She picked up at least 1 Pro Tour top 8 at every Pro Tour while she was in Standard, which is a pretty significant feat. Since she has rotated, though, as I noted, she hasn't seen any play, and I'm fairly certain that the power level is not quite there for her to see play in non-rotating formats, so it seems likely that some of the other elves on this list will find a way to pass her over time. At number 4, we have Bloodbraid Elf, who's actually tied with Nyssa for 65 points, but Bloodbraid has way more Pro Tour top 8s, and that broke the tie. Bloodbraid Elf is a stupid good magic card. For 4 mana, you get a 3/2 with haste and Cascade, which is one of the more broken mechanics they've ever designed. It allows you to cast a top card of your library that has a converted mana cost of less than the Bloodbraid Elf, so in other words 3, without paying its mana cost. 3 or less, I should say. The elf provides absolutely insane value, and as a result, it saw a decent amount of play when it was in Standard, mostly in Jund decks. Extended ceased to be a format shortly after this card was printed, but even so, it managed to put up a Pro Tour top 8 and 2 Grand Prix top 8s in the format, mostly in Jund decks once again. In Modern, the elf was so oppressive and made Jund decks so good that it eventually got banned out of the format, and it remains on the ban list today. What really got the elf banned was the fact that you could cascade into something like Liliana of the Veil, which was completely insane, and that was a stupid enough thing to do that it even saw some play in Legacy. If the elf had never been banned out of Modern, it seems likely that he would be the number 1 elf on this list. Because of that banning, it hasn't done anything competitive in a while, but it is still pretty high on this list because of just how dominant it was when it was legal. At number 3, I have Sylvan Advocate, the only card in this list that is legal in the current Standard. Like Nyssa, the Advocate has done all of its work in Standard and has been dominant there. 2 mana 2/3 with Vigilance is nothing incredible, but it does mean that the Advocate can't be killed by cards like Shock. It eventually becomes a 4/5/2, which put it out of the range of Languish while it was in Standard, which was pretty good for a 2-mana creature. Also, like Nyssa, Sylvan Advocate benefited from being the same color as Collected Company, and a card that Collected Company could hit, and that is where it did a lot of its damage. But it has seen play in a lot of green decks since it has been in Standard, including Abzan, Selesnya tokens, Gruul Ramp, and more recently, black-green Constrictor decks. The Advocate has a while before it rotates and will likely improve its score a little bit before it does. It seems unlikely to see play in Modern, though, where decks run way fewer lands, and making it into a 2-mana 4/5 is way harder than making Tarmogoyf into a 2-mana 4/5. At number 2, we have one of the best 1-drops in the history of Magic, Deathright Shaman. This thing does a lot for the mana you pay, a 1/2 body, plus the ability to either ramp you, gain you life, or do the last bit of damage to your opponent. Despite how powerful it was, it didn't see a huge amount of play in Standard. It certainly saw some, primarily in decks that like to fill their graveyard, like Reanimator decks, which meant the Deathright Shaman could be fueled for a while. It also saw play in Jund, Reanimator, and Zombie decks. But where it really shines is in formats with fetch lands, where the Deathright Shaman is basically a Llanowar Elves on steroids, since it can help you ramp while also having all of its other useful abilities. It saw play alongside Bloodbraid Elf in Jund decks, but also saw play in Birthing Pod decks. It and Bloodbraid Elf combined to make Jund way too powerful, and both of them got banned out of Modern eventually. Unlike Bloodbraid Elf, though, the Shaman has been powerful enough to see consistent play in the older non-rotating formats of Legacy and Vintage. In Legacy, the Shaman sees play mostly in decks that run Delver of Secrets, such as Grixis Delver and Shardless Bug. It will continue to see play in these non-rotating formats for the foreseeable future, and it will probably make a run at the number 1 spot on this list despite being banned in Modern. Now, who do we have at number 1? At number 1, we have a bunch of mana elves. I elected not to include all 3 of them on this list. If I had, they would have taken up 3 slots on this list, with Llanowar Elves at number 1, Elvish Mystic at number 3, and Arbor Elf at number 6. These cards are so similar that I didn't want to spend 3 different slots talking about them. In fact, Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic are functionally the same card. Elvish Mystic just takes away the Dominaria flavor that Llanowar Elves has. All 3 of these are powerful because they allow you to play 3 drops in turn 2, 4 drops in turn 3, and so on. Mana Elves have long been powerful in Magic, and recently Wizards concluded that they no longer wanted to make sure that they had Mana Elf in the Standard format, and as a result, ever since Elvish Mystic has rotated, we just haven't had one. Before Elvish Mystic rotated, it seems like we almost always had one. All 3 of these cards saw play in basically any green deck in the standard formats in which they were legal. Llanowar Elves has the most impressive numbers because it has existed since the beginning of Magic, having been printed in Alpha, and has also been reprinted a ton of times. Arbor Elf has also been reprinted once, but its numbers are less impressive, with Elvish Mystic in the middle in terms of reprints. I'm not going to bore you guys with a listing of all the different decks these cards were in, so we'll just leave it at saying that 1 mana creatures are super powerful, and these cards proved that by showing up in a ton of different decks. Well, that does it for this top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button. In the comments, give me and Seiben suggestions for future top 10s where he can do a lore video and I can do a top 10 list. And if you want to make sure that you catch more of my top 10s and other great content from the other contributors to the Aether Hub, don't forget to subscribe. You can also find more of my top 10s on my channel, NizzahonMagic. Thanks for watching.